Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The first time I noticed his eyes linger on me, it was late in the office. The rest of the staff had gone home hours earlier, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint tapping of rain against the tall glass windows. I was bent over a stack of reports, exhausted but determined to finish before leaving. When I glanced up, I caught him watching me, not with the cold detachment of a superior, but with something softer, something searching. His name was Daniel. Price. To the world, he was the perfect man married to his college sweetheart, a father of two, and the kind of boss who commanded respect without ever raising his voice. To me, he was untouchable, a figure of power I had always tried to impress, but never expected to know beyond work. Yet that night, when his eyes lingered a second too long, the air between us shifted. "Go home, Emma," he said, though his tone lacked authority. It was gentler, almost hesitant. I packed my bag and left, but my heart raced the entire drive home. That look, those few seconds of silence, stayed with me. And as much as I tried to bury it under deadlines and tasks, it kept surfacing, haunting me. Days turned into weeks, and the glances multiplied. Passing in the hallway during meetings, even across the cafeteria table, his eyes sought mine like they had a mind of their own. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. A man like him, with a beautiful wife and 2 children, wouldn't risk it. But one evening, while handing him a file, our hands brushed. It was nothing innocent, fleeting. Yet I pulled back like I'd been burned. And when I looked up, his expression told me everything I'd been afraid to admit. He felt it too. I tried to resist. I told myself I wouldn't be that woman, the one who became a secret, a shadow in someone else's life. But fate has a cruel way of twisting conviction. One Friday night, when a storm flooded the city and trains shut down, I found myself stranded at the office with him. The building was nearly empty, just us and the rain hammering against the windows. We worked in silence for hours, but every second felt heavy, charged. Finally, I closed my laptop and whispered, "We should call it a night." He looked up, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Emma," he said softly, almost like a plea. The way he spoke my name undid me. I couldn't stop the tears that welled up, tears I didn't even realize I'd been holding. All the loneliness in my marriage to Mark, all the nights I had lain awake wondering if my husband even saw me anymore, poured out in that moment. Daniel stood, walked around the desk, and without a word, he brushed a strand of wet hair from my face. That simple touch broke every wall I had built. I leaned into him, and when his lips finally found mine, it wasn't lust that consumed me, it was recognition. As if my heart had been waiting for his all along. The affair began in whispers, in stolen moments, early mornings when he'd bring me coffee and let his fingers linger on mine, lunchtime walks where our shoulders brushed just enough to remind us of what waited later, and nights, the nights when we found ourselves alone, unable to resist the pull anymore. His hands, once reserved and professional, became a map of passion on my skin. He made me feel alive, adored, desired in a way Mark hadn't in years. But passion was never without consequence. At home, Mark began noticing my distance. He'd ask about my late hours, my distracted stares, the way I'd flinch when he touched me. I lied, told him work was just overwhelming, that I was tired. But guilt festered inside me like a slow poison. I'd watch him playing with our son, hear him laugh, and wonder how I could betray a man who had once been my whole world. Still, the pull toward Daniel was unstoppable. He'd look at me during meetings, and I'd feel my breath catch. In his office, when the door was shut, we were fire and shadow, craving each other like the world outside didn't exist. One evening, after another stolen kiss that left us both, breathless, I whispered, "We can't keep doing this." "I know," he replied, his forehead pressed against mine. "But how do I stop when you feel like the only thing I've ever wanted?" I should have ended it then. I should have walked away before we both lost ourselves completely. But love, or whatever reckless version of it this was, doesn't bow to reason. I loved him. Maybe not in the safe, steady way I once loved Mark, but in a desperate, aching way that consumed me. And so I stayed. Every glance, every stolen moment, every lie told at home was another thread weaving me deeper into Daniel's world. I knew the risk, I knew the cost, but I couldn't turn away. Because once he looked at me differently, I was never the same again. The months that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and impossible choices. Daniel and I had learned to navigate the dangerous tightrope between our desire and the world around us, but no amount of caution could erase the tension that had settled into my bones. Every day felt like walking on glass, beautiful, thrilling. But one misstep would leave both of us bleeding. In the office, we maintained the illusion of professionalism. He was still the confident, composed executive everyone admired, and I was the diligent assistant who never faltered under pressure. But beneath the surface, we were constantly aware of each other. A glance across a boardroom, the brush of hands when passing documents, even the faintest change in tone when one of us spoke, these were little reminders of our secret, each one igniting the fire we tried so desperately to contain. At home, life had become a cold, predictable routine. Mark seemed to sense the distance, but didn't challenge it, and perhaps that was worse than confrontation. He barely looked at me anymore, barely noticed my smiles or frowns. I sometimes caught him staring at the television, the glow reflecting in his eyes, and I wondered if he had always been this indifferent, or if I had simply stopped noticing the shift long ago. The house felt like a waiting room where I came only to sleep and eat, never to truly exist. It was the quiet, empty spaces in my own home that drove me back to Daniel. There were nights when I would lie awake in our bedroom, feeling the warmth of Mark's presence beside me, and yet all I could think about was Daniel, the curve of his jaw, the way his fingers traced my skin, the husky depth of his voice when he whispered my name. I told myself it was wrong, that I was betraying everything I'd built, but desire isn't governed by reason. It was hunger, pure and relentless, and nothing in my life could satisfy it but him. One rainy evening, Daniel asked me to meet him at a small hotel downtown. He claimed it was the only place we could speak freely, the only place where we didn't have to hide behind closed doors and whispered excuses. When I arrived, the lobby was empty, the rain pounding against the windows, like a drumbeat of anticipation. He was waiting in the corner, leaning casually against the wall, but the moment our eyes met, I saw the intensity there, the same look that had first drawn me in months ago, now sharper, more desperate. He pulled me into his arms immediately, and the world fell away. There was no pretending, no hesitation, just raw need. Our lips met in a hungry, relentless kiss that left us both breathless. Hands roamed freely now, tracing curves and planes, memorizing skin like a map of everything we had denied ourselves. The hours that followed were a blur of whispered confessions, shared laughter, and endless touches that left my body humming long after I left. But even as we burned, the guilt followed. On the drive home, my thoughts churned violently. I saw Mark sitting alone in our living room, his eyes tired, his movements automatic. Was he really oblivious, or did he sense the truth and choose to ignore it? The thought made my stomach twist, and I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I loved Daniel in a way I hadn't thought possible, but I also felt the suffocating weight of my choices pressing down on me. At work, the tension between us grew more electric. Daniel's touches lingered longer, his glances held deeper meaning, and even the smallest proximity made my pulse race. I began to notice him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, the corners of his mouth lifting in that faint, almost imperceptible way that no one else ever saw. There were days when I would catch myself staring at him during meetings, forgetting the words of others, forgetting where I was entirely. One afternoon, we were alone in the office after everyone had left for a company retreat. The lights were dim and rain rattled against the windows. I had been reviewing reports, and he had come in with a cup of coffee, the warmth of the liquid. In my hands did little to soothe the ache in my chest. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly, leaning against the desk. His eyes, dark and unreadable, searched mine for a reaction. I haven't, I lied. Though my voice trembled, he stepped closer, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me the cup. Don't lie to me, he whispered. I see everything. The words hit me like a punch. I didn't resist as he reached for me, drawing me into an embrace that left the rest of the office invisible. His lips pressed to mine with a ferocity that left me dizzy, trembling, aching for more. I clung to him as if letting go would shatter. Me entirely, even as our relationship deepened, the world around us became more dangerous. Colleagues began noticing the unusual energy when we were near, subtle changes in demeanor that sparked whispered rumors. Every step outside the office was a risk. Every text, every call had to be coded, carefully concealed. And yet, every challenge, every danger only seemed to strengthen our bond. We were a secret world unto ourselves, and nothing else mattered. When we were together, then came the night I realized I could no longer pretend to live two lives. Daniel had invited me to a rooftop bar overlooking the city, somewhere high above the noise and routine of my mundane existence. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. He held my hand tightly, and for the first time, I felt the weight of reality pressing in. I can't keep doing this, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I can't keep living in shadows. He held me close, his forehead resting against mine. I know, he said quietly, but I can't lose you, Emma, not now, not ever. We stayed there for hours, wrapped in each other's arms, staring at the city lights blinking below. Every word we spoke, every touch, was a promise and a confession. I knew we were playing with fire, but I also knew I could never walk away. Returning home that night, the contrast was suffocating. Mark's face, blank and unseeing, reminded me of what I had left behind. And yet, the memory of Daniel's hands, his lips, his whispered words consumed me. I lay awake beside Mark, body trembling, heart aching, mind racing with thoughts of loss. The man who'd awakened me after years of numbness, days bled into nights like this, each one a delicate balance of passion, secrecy, and guilt. I began to understand that this was no longer a fleeting attraction or a dangerous fling. It was love, complicated and consuming. But love lived in a paradox. It gave me everything I had been missing and demanded a sacrifice I wasn't sure. I could endure as Daniel and I continued our dangerous dance. Every moment grew more intense, more urgent. We were reckless, desperate, addicted to each other, yet painfully aware that one misstep could destroy everything. The thrill of our secret was intoxicating, but it was also a constant reminder of the fragile world we had built, a world where love and desire coexisted with lies and betrayal, where every kiss was both salvation and sin. And still, despite the fear, the guilt, and the impossible choices, I couldn't walk away. Because once Daniel had looked at me differently, once he had reached through the armor of my life and touched the part of me I have long buried, there was no turning back. I was his, and he was mine secretly, dangerously, irrevocably. Our story was far from over. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with risk, yet every heartbeat, every glance, every stolen night reminded me that love, in all its reckless, consuming glory, was worth every risk. The days that followed grew heavier, each one a careful negotiation between my responsibilities, my guilt, and the pull I couldn't resist. Daniel and I had fallen into a rhythm of secrecy, but the intensity of what we shared had deepened beyond simple desire. Every glance, every touch, carried the weight of something that had long been absent from my life. Genuine connection, undiluted by routine or obligation. At work, our interactions became a delicate choreography. No one else could detect the tension that simmered beneath our professional facades, yet every small gesture carried a silent message. I learned to read the subtle changes in his posture, the fleeting expressions that betrayed his emotions, even when his words didn't. He had always been precise and controlled. But now there was a quiet urgency in his actions. He lingered slightly longer when handing me files, His voice softened ever so subtly when speaking to me, and sometimes, just sometimes, I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't. Looking.home had become a shadow of its former self. Mark's indifference was almost tangible, and it made the house feel empty even when I was inside it. Meals were silent, TV shows flickered unnoticed, and the warmth that had once existed between us was replaced with a sterile companionship. There were moments when I imagined him noticing the change in me, seeing the way my thoughts were elsewhere, and yet he never asked. Perhaps he had always known, or perhaps he had stopped caring long ago. Either way, his inattention made it easier to justify the choices I had made, though it did nothing to ease the gnawing guilt inside me. One night, after a long day at the office, Daniel asked me to meet him at his apartment. I hesitated, knowing I would have to sneak away from home and pretend it was just another mundane errand. But when I arrived, rain pounding against the city windows, the sight of him waiting by the door melted away any remaining hesitation. He didn't speak at first. He simply pulled me into his arms, and I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline and longing. His lips found mine with a hunger that left me breathless, his hands tracing the lines of my body with a familiarity that both thrilled and terrified me. We moved through the apartment as though no one else existed, forgetting the world outside, forgetting the consequences, forgetting the fragile balance of our lives. The nights we spent together became longer, more intimate, and more revealing. He showed me parts of himself I had never seen: vulnerable, tender, frustrated by the expectations of the life he had built. I shared pieces of my own heart with him, the loneliness and emptiness I had endured for years, and in those confessions, we found solace and understanding. It wasn't just passion anymore. It was something deeper, a bond forged in secrecy and necessity, yet undeniably real. Yet the danger of discovery loomed constantly. I became acutely aware of the eyes that lingered too long, the whispers in the hallways, the subtle changes in colleagues' expressions. Every late night at the office, every unexpected phone call carried the risk of exposure. And still, every risk seemed worth it the moment Daniel's hand found mine, or his lips pressed against mine, or his gaze held me in a way that made the rest of the world disappear. At home, the distance between Mark and me widened into a canyon. He barely noticed my presence, barely spoke my name, and I felt the truth more keenly than ever. Our marriage had been over long before I met Daniel. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I was betraying a life I had once promised to protect, but I was also embracing a love I could no longer deny. One evening, we found ourselves on a deserted terrace overlooking the city. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of rain and the quiet hum of life below. Daniel held me close, his voice low and serious. "I can't imagine going back to how things were," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "I don't want to just steal moments anymore. I want more, but I don't know if we can." His words echoed in my mind long after we parted. I knew he was right. We couldn't continue like this forever. Our love was intense, consuming, but it existed in a world built on lies, and yet the thought of walking away was unbearable. I had seen too much, felt too much, and been awakened in ways I never imagined possible. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Our relationship deepened, moving beyond secret rendezvous into something that felt almost normal in its intensity. Daniel began to confide in me about his fears, his regrets, the parts of his life he had long kept hidden. I shared my own struggles, the cracks in my marriage, the dissatisfaction I had tried to mask with routines and excuses. Together, we created a small world where honesty and desire existed side by side, even if it was built on deception. The pressure of living two lives began to weigh on me. At times, I would lie awake beside Mark, my body numb, my heart racing with thoughts of Daniel. I wondered how long I could continue this charade, how long I could navigate the treacherous line between loyalty and desire. The tension was exhausting, but the thought of giving up Daniel was unthinkable. He had become my constant, my anchor, and the absence of him felt like a physical ache. One rainy night, after another stolen encounter, we sat together in his apartment, the city lights reflected in the windows. He held me close, his forehead resting against mine. I don't want this to be all we ever are stolen moments, whispers in the dark, he murmured. I want a life with you, but the world makes it impossible. I didn't answer, tears prickling my eyes. The truth was simple and devastating. I loved him, completely and utterly, and I couldn't imagine a life without him. And yet, the world outside, the responsibilities I couldn't abandon, the marriage that had long since soured, all conspired against us. Still in his arms, I felt alive. The rest of the world, the office, the empty home, the cautious glances. Others fell away. I'd found something I had thought was lost forever. Passion, connection, and the kind of love that could consume you entirely. And for now, that was enough. We both knew the future was uncertain, that our secret couldn't last forever. But for the time being, we existed in the moments between reality and desire, building a love that was forbidden, dangerous, and utterly irresistible. Every stolen kiss, every whispered confession, every night spent tangled together was a testament to the life we had chosen for ourselves, even if the world would never understand it. And though the tension of living a double life pressed on me constantly, I had made my choice. Daniel wasn't just my boss anymore. He was the man I loved, the man who had awakened my heart, and the man I could no longer imagine living without, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a careful balancing act, each day threaded with tension, secrecy, and the sharp thrill of forbidden desire. My mornings began in a daze, moving through the motions of a life that no longer felt fully mine. I dressed, made breakfast, exchanged a few words with Mark that felt hollow, and left the house with a tight knot in my stomach. Yet beneath that dread, there was always anticipation, the knowledge that Daniel awaited me, that the hours at the office could stretch into something more. At work, our interactions became a silent language. A brush of a hand, a glance held a second too long, a slight hesitation before speaking. It was a world only we understood. His presence, always commanding, seemed to soften whenever I was near, and I found myself looking for those fleeting moments of vulnerability, holding on to them like precious gems. There was a hunger between us, an intensity that made normal conversation almost unbearable because every word could carry hidden meaning. Sometimes we would find ourselves in conference rooms long after everyone had left, pretending to finish reports while our hearts raced in ways words could not capture. Daniel's control, so absolute in the office, gave way to a tenderness that was almost frightening in its intensity. He would study my face as though memorizing every curve, every expression, and I felt equally mesmerized by him, tracing the lines of his jaw, the shadow in his eyes, the way his brow furrowed when he was lost in thought. At home, the contrast was stark. Mark had become a ghost in our shared life, more interested in his own distractions than in me. Dinner was silent, television flickered as background noise, and any attempt at conversation felt forced and hollow. I often caught myself staring at him, wondering when love had slipped through our fingers, and then shaking off the melancholy because Daniel's memory burned too brightly to dwell in the past. He had reignited something in me I thought had long been buried, and no amount of guilt could extinguish that fire. One night, rain pounding against the windows, I found myself at Daniel's apartment once more. The city lights blurred through, the rain-streaked glass casting reflections across the minimalist interior. He met me at the door, his usual composed expression softened by something tender and raw. He didn't speak, just drew me into his arms, and I felt the familiar wave of warmth and tension collide inside me. We moved through the apartment like it was the only world that mattered. His hands traced familiar paths, memorized and remembered, igniting a deep ache that had no remedy. We talked in hushed voices, revealing small pieces of our lives that no one else knew. Daniel admitted fears and insecurities that he never let show in the office, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of success, the emptiness that lingered even in a life others would envy. I shared my own vulnerabilities, the quiet despair of a marriage devoid of passion, the fear that I was losing myself even as I found something new and intoxicating. Our affair was no longer just a series of stolen moments. It had become the center of my existence. Every lunch break, every chance encounter in the office, every glance from across the room carried electricity. I found myself craving him in ways that frightened me, the longing so deep it often left me breathless. Each time I left his apartment and returned home, the contrast was unbearable. Mark asleep on the couch, oblivious, the warmth of Daniel's presence replaced by emptiness. And yet, I couldn't imagine choosing differently. The risk of exposure hung over us constantly. Whispers of suspicion, fleeting glances from colleagues, and the unpredictable nature of Mark's quiet attentiveness created a tension that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. We became adept at subtlety. A hand brushed under the table. Fleeting touch in the corridor, a shared smile that carried the weight of unspoken promises. Each encounter was sharpened by the knowledge that discovery could happen at any moment. One evening, Daniel suggested a dinner outside of the city. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment affair. It was a carefully planned escape from the pressures that surrounded us. The restaurant was secluded, dimly lit, the air thick with rain and the scent of anticipation. We sat across from each other, hands brushing intermittently, eyes locking with unspoken intensity. The conversation was casual on the surface. Beneath it lay an undercurrent of longing and fear, a reminder of how fragile our stolen world was. Do you ever think about what life would be like if we weren't confined to this secrecy? I asked quietly, tracing the rim of my glass with a fingertip. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of all the emotions he usually kept buried: desire, fear, longing, and the hint of hope. Every day, he murmured. But life isn't that simple. There are consequences, obligations, things we can't just ignore. I know, I whispered, feeling the weight of reality pressing down on us. But sometimes I wish we could be selfish, even if just for a little while. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. The touch was gentle but charged, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that tied us together. We are selfish, he said softly. And yet, somehow, it feels like the only thing that's real in this world. The days turned into weeks, the tension between desire and reality never fully resolving. We grew bolder in small ways, lingering touches, known smiles, the brush of lips in hallways no one else noticed. Yet the danger of discovery remained. Ever present, a sharp reminder that our love existed in the margins. In the spaces between lies and truth. At home, Mark's detachment became more pronounced. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed the changes in me, if he understood the way my heart no longer belonged fully to him. But his silence, his indifference, became part of the rhythm that allowed me to continue. Even as guilt gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, Daniel and I carved out moments of intensity wherever we could. Early mornings before the office, late nights after the building had emptied, the quiet sanctuary of his apartment, they became lifelines. Each encounter deepened our connection, the physical and emotional intertwining growing stronger, more complex. He learned me in ways that went beyond desire. He knew my thoughts before I spoke them, anticipated my movements, and touched parts of me that had long been dormant. We became each other's confessions and our own private world. And though the fear of exposure lingered like a shadow, the love we shared, dangerous and illicit as it was, became impossible to deny. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word reminded us that what we had was alive, burning bright and utterly irreplaceable. Even as the reality of our situation pressed down the fragile veneer of my marriage, the professional boundaries, the social expectations, we clung to each other, finding courage and solace in our defiance. We were playing with fire and we both knew it, yet the heat was too intoxicating to resist. Every stolen glance, every shared secret, every night spent together was a testament to a love that refused to be hidden, no matter the cost. And in that chaotic, beautiful, dangerous world, I realized the truth. Daniel was no longer just my boss. He had become the man I loved, the man I would fight for, The man who had awakened something in me that I thought was lost forever. And slowly, painfully, recklessly, he had fallen for me too. We existed in a world of shadow and flame, knowing that the line we walked could break at any moment. But for now, all that mattered was us, the impossible, irresistible, consuming us,